There's a pattern that has destroyed 3 reserve currencies in the last 500 years. 8 stages, each one following the previous with mathematical precision. And right now, in early 2026, the United States dollar is at stage 5. The Spanish real collapsed after 150 years of dominance. The British pound collapsed after 200 years. The Russian ruble took 70 years. Each followed the exact same sequence. Not similar, identical, different speeds. Same 8 stages, same catastrophic end. And here's what should terrify you. The pattern doesn't care about military strength. It doesn't care about economic size. It doesn't care about global influence. The pattern is mathematical. And once you reach stage 5, the only question is how fast you reach stage 8. Stage 1. Imperial expansion creates resource inflow. This is where it begins, not with weakness, with strength, with expansion, with conquest creating the illusion of unlimited resources. Spain, 1600s. The Castilian real was the foundation of global trade. When Hernán Cortés entered Tenochtitlan in 1519, he didn't just conquer the Aztec Empire. He discovered something that would define the next century: silver. Mountains of it in Mexico and Peru. By 1550, Spanish galleons were transporting 200 tons of silver annually across the Atlantic. By 1590, that had tripled to 600 tons per year. The treasure fleet arrived in Seville like clockwork, bars of silver stacked in royal warehouses. The Spanish crown suddenly had access to wealth beyond anything Europe had ever seen. This created the illusion of infinite resources. The monarchy didn't need to develop domestic industry. Why manufacture goods when you could buy them with silver? Why invest in agriculture when grain could be imported? The silver would last forever. Or so they believed. Britain, 1800s. The British pound, sterling backed the largest empire in history. After Waterloo in 1815, Britain controlled 1/4 of the Earth's surface. India alone generated 40% of British trade revenue. The colonies provided raw materials: cotton from India, rubber from Malaya, gold from South Africa. London became the financial center of the world. The pound was the global reserve currency. If you wanted to trade internationally, you traded in pounds. Britain didn't produce the resources, it controlled them. And control looked identical to ownership until it wasn't. Soviet Union, 1900s. The ruble was backed by the world's largest state-controlled economy. The USSR controlled oil fields in Baku, gold mines in Siberia, and agricultural production across 15 republics. Central planning meant all resources flowed to Moscow. The state controlled everything. The ruble reflected that control. But here's what makes stage 1 dangerous. The resource inflow isn't wealth. It's a loan against future production. Spain wasn't rich because of silver. Spain was consuming future capacity in the present. Britain wasn't wealthy from colonies. Britain was extracting value that couldn't be sustained once the colonies left. The USSR wasn't strong from centralized resources. It was burning through capital while calling it growth. Stage 1 looks like strength. It's actually the beginning of addiction, and addiction always requires more. Stage 2. Currency becomes international reserve. The resource inflow from stage 1 creates demand for the currency, not because the currency is inherently valuable, because everyone needs it to access the resources. Spain, 1500s to 1600s. By 1580, the Spanish real was the dominant currency for international trade. If you wanted to buy goods in Amsterdam, Lisbon, Genoa, you needed reales. Spanish silver coins circulated across Europe, the Mediterranean, and even reached Asia through the Manila galleons. The famous Piece of 8 became the world's first truly global currency. Merchants in Shanghai accepted it. Traders in Venice used it. The real wasn't just Spanish money, it was money. And this created a trap. Spain could spend reales abroad because foreign merchants wanted them. This meant Spain could run trade deficits indefinitely. Buy more than you sell. Pay with your own currency. As long as everyone accepts reales, the game continues. Britain, 1800s to 1900s. The pound sterling became the global reserve currency after Waterloo. By 1850, over 60% of international trade was denominated in pounds. The gold standard, established in 1821, backed the pound with gold reserves stored in the Bank of England. This created what historians call Pax Britannica, peace through British financial dominance. Any nation that wanted to trade internationally needed pounds. Britain could borrow at lower rates than anyone else because pounds were always in demand. The world's banks held pounds as reserves. But reserve currency status is a double-edged sword. Yes, you can run deficits. Yes, you can borrow cheaply. But you're also exporting your currency. And everyone holding your currency has a claim on your economy. When they want to redeem those claims, you have to deliver. Soviet Union, 1920s to 1980s. The ruble was the reserve currency within the Soviet sphere. Comecon, the Economic Organization of Communist States, conducted trade in rubles. Cuba, East Germany, Poland, all held ruble reserves. This wasn't global reserve status like the pound or real, but within its sphere, the ruble functioned identically. The USSR could export rubles and import goods. As long as communist states accepted rubles, Moscow could run deficits across Eastern Europe. Stage 2 amplifies Stage 1. You're not just consuming resources domestically, you're exporting currency and importing goods globally. The deficit grows, the dependency deepens, and everyone starts to think this is normal. This is how empires work. Forever. Except nothing is forever. Stage 3. Deficit spending begins to fund military overextension. This is where the trap closes. The empire has expanded, the currency is global, and now the military costs start compounding. Spain, 1560s to 1620s. The Spanish monarchy wasn't just managing an empire, it was fighting everyone. The 80 Years' War against the Dutch, the 30 Years' War in Central Europe, wars in Italy, wars in North Africa, Spanish troops in Flanders, Germany, the Mediterranean, the Americas. By 1557, King Philip II inherited debts that consumed 75% of royal revenues. Not spending, just interest payments on existing debts. And the wars kept getting more expensive. The Spanish Army of Flanders required 6 million ducats annually. The treasure fleet from America brought in 10 million. Half the silver went to soldiers before it even reached Spain. The monarchy responded with deficit spending. Borrow from Genoese bankers, borrow from German banking houses, promise repayment from future silver shipments, and the bankers lent because Spanish silver backed the loans, until it didn't. Britain 1870s to 1940s. The British Empire at its peak required an enormous military to defend. The Royal Navy was the largest in the world by 1880. 350 ships, bases in Gibraltar, Malta, Singapore, the Falklands, everywhere. The army defended India with 80,000 British troops plus 240,000 native soldiers. World War I broke the budget. Britain entered the war in 1914 with debts of £650 million. By 1918, national debt was £7.4 billion, an 11-fold increase in 4 years. The war cost £3 billion total, and Britain borrowed most of it from America. Then came World War II. Britain started the war in 1939 with national debt at £7.1 billion. By 1945, national debt was £21 billion. Triple in 6 years, and Britain was on the winning side. Victory was expensive. Defeat would have been catastrophic. Soviet Union, 1970s to 1980s. The USSR was spending 15 to 20% of GDP on military by the 1980s. That's 3 to 4 times what NATO countries spent. The army required 5 million active duty soldiers. The Navy built aircraft carriers. The Air Force developed advanced fighters. Nuclear weapons programs consumed billions. And then Afghanistan, December 1979. Soviet troops invaded, thinking they'd stabilize the country in months. 10 years later, they retreated. 15,000 Soviet dead. 800 billion rubles spent. The war that broke the Soviet budget. Not because of the casualties, because of the cost. Stage 3 is where deficit spending becomes structural. You're not borrowing for investment. You're borrowing to pay soldiers, to fund wars, to maintain empire. And military spending doesn't generate economic returns, it just consumes resources. Stage 4. Domestic production declines as imports increase. While the empire fights abroad, the economy at home starts dying. Not from war, from dependency. Spain, 1580s to 1630s. Spanish manufacturing collapsed during the height of empire. Why? Because it was cheaper to import. Silver bought everything. Textiles from Flanders. Grain from the Baltic. Manufactured goods from Italy. Spain became a pass-through economy. Silver came in from America. Goods came in from Europe. And the silver flowed straight back out. By 1600, Spain's domestic wool industry had collapsed. Textile production in Toledo fell 75% between 1550 and 1650. Shipbuilding in Barcelona declined. Why make things when you can buy them with silver? The economist Earl Hamilton documented this in brutal detail. 17,000 sacks of wool were exported from Santander in 1572 on 66 ships. 50 years later, only 505 bags left on 11 ships, a 97% collapse. Britain, 1920s to 1960s. British manufacturing faced competition from America and Germany after World War I. The pound was overvalued. British goods were expensive. Factories closed. Unemployment hit 20% in some industrial areas. By 1950, Britain imported more food than it produced. The country that once fed itself from domestic agriculture now depended on imports. Steel production declined. Shipbuilding moved to Japan and Korea. Car manufacturing struggled against American competition. The empire provided captive markets temporarily. India bought British goods because it was part of the empire. Once India gained independence in 1947, British exports collapsed. Soviet Union, 1970s to 1980s. Soviet domestic production never served consumers. It served the state, but even state production began failing. Agriculture couldn't feed the population. The USSR started importing grain from America in 1972. A superpower buying food from its enemy. Consumer goods were scarce. Quality was terrible. The joke in Moscow? They pretend to pay us, we pretend to work. Manufacturing focused on military production while civilian factories produced goods nobody wanted. Stage 4 is insidious because it happens while you're distracted by Stage 3. You're focused on military spending and wars. You don't notice your factories closing, your workers leaving, your economy becoming dependent on imports you pay for with currency you're printing faster every year. Stage 5. Currency debasement accelerates to finance deficits. This is where we are right now with the dollar. This is the point of no return. The government faces a choice. Cut spending and trigger immediate economic pain. Or print money and delay the pain. Guess which they choose? Spain, 1599 to 1660. King Philip III introduced pure copper coinage in 1599. Before this, Spanish coins were silver or gold. Copper coins, called vellon, were supposed to be temporary small change. But the crown started stamping copper coins with silver denominations. A copper coin that cost 1 maravedì to produce was stamped with a value of 8 maravedis. The government pocketed the difference. This is seigniorage, the profit from printing money, and Spain became addicted. By 1620, copper coins flooded Spain. Prices doubled, then doubled again. The gap between copper-based prices and silver-based prices reached 100% by 1650. If you paid in copper, prices would double what they were in silver. The historian Akira Motomura documented that seigniorage rates hit 70%. The government was taking 70% profit on every copper coin minted. It's the same as if your government printed $10 that only cost $3 to produce and kept $7. Do that for 50 years and your currency dies. Britain 1914 to 1971. Britain abandoned the gold standard in 1914 to print money for World War I. Returned to gold in 1925, but at an overvalued rate. Abandoned it permanently in 1931. The pound became pure fiat currency. World War II required printing billions. The money supply exploded. But Britain maintained capital controls and rationing to hide the inflation. After the war, inflation arrived. The pound that bought one loaf of bread in 1940 bought half a loaf by 1950. Devaluations followed. 1949, the pound fell 30% against the dollar. 1967, another 14%. By the 1970s, inflation hit 25% annually. The currency was dying in real time. Soviet Union 1980s to 1991. The USSR printed rubles to finance Afghanistan, military spending, and subsidies to satellite states. The official inflation rate was 0. The government claimed prices were stable, but store shelves were empty. You couldn't buy anything because there was nothing to buy. This was hidden inflation. Too much money chasing too few goods. The goods just disappeared instead of prices rising. By 1987, black market exchange rates showed the ruble was worth 1/10 the official rate. When the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, inflation exploded. 1992, 1,500%. 1993, 875%. 1994, 307%. The currency that took 70 years to build died in 3 years. United States 1971 to present. August 15th, 1971. President Nixon closed the gold window. No more gold redemption. The dollar became pure fiat currency. And the printing began. From 1971 to 2020, the M2 money supply grew from 600 billion to 15.4 trillion. 26 times increase in 50 years. Then COVID hit. The Federal Reserve printed 5.8 trillion in 2 years, 2020 to 2022. That's a 38% increase in 2 years, more than the entire money supply in 1980. And it's accelerating. The national debt is 36.2 trillion as of January 2026. Interest payments hit 1.13 trillion in 2024. That's more than the defense budget, and rising. By 2030, interest payments could hit 2 trillion annually. The government has 3 options: cut spending, raise taxes, or print money. They'll print, they always print, because printing is the politically survivable option. Voters don't understand inflation, they understand budget cuts. Stage 5 is where the pattern becomes irreversible. You can't stop printing without crashing the economy. You can't keep printing without destroying the currency. You're trapped, and history says there's no exit except through stage 8. But before we get there, let me show you stages 6 and 7 because they're coming fast. Stage 6. Foreign holders begin dumping the currency. Once foreign governments and investors realize the currency is being debased, they sell. Fast. And that selling accelerates the collapse. Spain, 1620s to 1640s. Spanish silver started fleeing the country. Merchants in Seville would receive silver from America and immediately ship it to Amsterdam or Genoa. Why keep debased Spanish copper when you could hold good foreign silver? Foreign banks stopped accepting Spanish copper coins. By 1640, Spanish copper wasn't accepted anywhere outside Castile. The currency that once circulated globally now couldn't buy goods in neighboring Portugal. Britain, 1945 to 1967. After World War II, foreign central banks held massive pound reserves, but confidence was dying. Devaluation in 1949 triggered selling. Devaluation in 1967 triggered more. The Suez Crisis in 1956 showed British weakness. Foreign holders dumped pounds. The Bank of England burned through reserves defending the currency, failed, the pound fell, and every fall triggered more selling. By 1970s, central banks were diversifying out of pounds into dollars and gold. The pound's share of global reserves fell from 40% in 1950 to 10% by 1980. Soviet Union, 1988 to 1991. Nobody held rubles except communist states who had no choice. When communism started collapsing in 1989, Eastern European countries tried to exit ruble trade. Poland wanted dollars, Hungary wanted marks, everyone wanted out. By 1991, even Soviet republics were rejecting the ruble. Ukraine tried to create its own currency. The Baltic states exited immediately after independence. The currency zone collapsed in months, United States 2010 to present. China held 1.3 trillion in US treasuries in 2013. Today, 775 billion. They've sold $525 billion in US debt. That's a 40% reduction in 12 years. Japan reduced holdings from 1.24 trillion in 2014 to 1.15 trillion today. Russia liquidated 95% of treasury holdings after 2014 sanctions. Saudi Arabia, a US ally for 80 years, is accepting yuan for oil sales to China. The petrodollar monopoly that lasted 50 years is breaking. Dollar's share of global reserves was 73% in 1999. Today, 58%. That's a 15 percentage point drop in 25 years, and it's accelerating. The last 5 years saw a 5 percentage point drop. BRICS nations are building alternative payment systems. China's SIAPs processed 500 billion in payments in 2024. Russia and China trade in yuan and rubles. India buys Russian oil in rupees. The de-dollarization isn't theoretical, it's happening right now. Stage 7. Hyperinflation or severe recession destroys domestic economy. Once foreign demand collapses, all that printed currency comes home. And it comes home fast, causing either hyperinflation if the government keeps printing or severe recession if they stop. Spain 1640 to 1680. Spanish prices exploded. The consumer price index rose 461% from 1600 to 1650. Food riots, starvation, depopulation. Spain's population fell from 8.5 million in 1600 to 7 million by 1650. The government tried to recall copper coins and reissue them at lower values. People refused. They hoarded silver. They fled cities. The economy imploded. By 1680, Spain was no longer a major power. Britain 1970 to 1981. Stagflation. Unemployment hit 11%. Inflation peaked at 25% in 1975. Real wages fell. Strikes paralyzed the country. The winter of discontent in 1978 to 79. Garbage piled in streets. Bodies unburied because gravediggers were striking. The IMF had to bail out Britain in 1976. The IMF, bailing out the country that created the global financial system. The humiliation was total. Soviet Union, 1991 to 1998. Hyperinflation, pension savings evaporated. The middle class was annihilated. Factories closed. Unemployment exploded. Crime surged. Regional warlords took control of areas where the state collapsed. Life expectancy fell. Male life expectancy dropped from 64 in 1990 to 57 by 1994. An entire generation lost everything. Not because of war, because of currency collapse. Stage 8. New currency introduced, wealth transferred, old system reset. The final stage isn't apocalypse, it's reset. A new currency. A new system, and the people who saw it coming preserve wealth. Everyone else loses everything. Spain 1680 onward. Spain introduced new coinage multiple times trying to restore confidence. Never worked fully. Spain never regained superpower status. The empire fragmented. The currency became regional. Britain, 1946 to present. The pound survived, but as a second-tier currency. Britain went from global reserve to regional currency in 30 years. The empire dissolved. The currency followed. Soviet Union, 1991 to 1998. Russia introduced the new ruble in 1998. One new ruble equaled 1,000 old rubles. Wiped out savings, reset the system, but the wealth was already transferred. United States future. We're at stage 5 right now. Foreign selling has begun, but hasn't accelerated into panic. We haven't hit hyperinflation yet. The domestic economy is weakening, but not collapsing. We have maybe 10 years, maybe less. The timeline depends on how fast stage 6 accelerates into stage 7. Here's the math. If de-dollarization continues at current pace, 5 percentage points every 5 years, dollar reserve status falls to 40% by 2035. Once it crosses below 50%, confidence breaks completely. We enter stage 6, panic selling. If deficit spending continues at 2 trillion per year, national debt hits 50 trillion by 2035. Interest payments hit 3 trillion annually. That's 50% of tax revenue just on interest. The government will print. We enter stage 7, inflation. By 2040, the pattern completes. The dollar's 80-year run as global reserve currency ends. A new system emerges, possibly backed by gold, possibly a BRICS currency, possibly regional currency blocks. But the dollar's dominance ends. The pattern has played out 3 times, same 8 stages, different currencies, same result. And the United States is following the script perfectly. Stage 1. Imperial expansion creating resource inflow. Check. Post-World War II dominance. Petrodollar system. Complete. Stage 2. Currency becomes global reserve. Check. Bretton Woods. 1944. Dollar replaced pound. Complete. Stage 3. Military overextension. Check. 800 bases in 80 countries. Forever wars. 1.5 trillion in military spending. Complete. Stage 4. Domestic production declines. Check. Manufacturing move to China. Trade deficit 1.1 trillion annually. Complete. Stage 5. Currency debasement accelerates. Check. M2 money supply up 26 times since 1971. 5.8 trillion printed in 2 years. Complete. Stage 6. Foreign holders dumping currency. In progress. China down 40% on treasury holdings. Dollar reserve status down from 73% to 58%. Accelerating. Stage 7. Hyperinflation or severe recession. Not yet. But the math says 2030 to 2040. Stage 8. Currency reset. Future. But coming. 3 currencies followed this pattern completely. Spanish real, British pound, Russian ruble. All dead. All replaced. All took their empires with them. The pattern doesn't care that America has nuclear weapons. Spain had the largest army in Europe. Didn't matter. The pattern doesn't care that America has the largest economy. Britain had the largest economy in 1850. Didn't matter. The pattern doesn't care about American exceptionalism. Every empire thinks it's exceptional. None are. The pattern is math, and math doesn't negotiate. 5 stages complete. 3 stages remain. The timeline says 10 to 15 years maximum, and nothing in history suggests we can stop at stage 5. Because once you start printing to finance deficits you can't repay, the pattern completes. Every time, without exception. If this gave you a different perspective on where the dollar actually stands, there's another pattern you need to understand. The warning signs that appear right before empires collapse. Not currencies, entire empires. And America is showing every single warning sign right now. Check out that video. Because understanding what's coming is the only way to prepare before it's too late.